When my husband said no to reading marriage books, no to going to a marriage counselor, no to going to marriage events, I felt completely hopeless. And worst of all, every conversation I tried having with him about improving our marriage, he would shut down the conversation. If this is you, I'm excited for you to join me for this episode. Hi, I'm Julia Woods, coach, trainer, and founder of Beautiful Outcome, a coaching company focused on helping couples create communication where they feel seen and understood, no matter how difficult the conversation, so that you can spend your time enjoying life and having fun together. In today's episode, what I'm going to do is share with you how just one can transform a marriage, how you can begin to grow yourself and ultimately create the marriage that you long for, and 3, why my spouse might not have been overly excited about working on our marriage with me. I have a gift for you at the end of this episode, so make sure you stay all the way through because it's going to help you apply what you're learning today. My husband and I were so in love when we got married. We had read a few marriage books, we had gone to premarital counseling, and we had promised that we would always work on our marriage. Shortly after we got married, he said to me, "We're in this for life, so we might as well make the best of it." I was smitten. I couldn't imagine a day that would come where he would get angry every time and any time I brought up wanting to get help with our marriage. But fast forward 10 to 15 years, we were raising 4 kids, running a very busy business, and we were spending most of our nights and weekends fighting. We would get angry and shut down, or I would, burst out of the room, frustrated because we were just butting heads over and over. We were finding more and more conversations that we just stopped trying to have because we couldn't find a way to have them. It was obvious we needed help. Secretly, I thought he was the problem. He was depressed, he was unengaged at work, and overall, he was just miserable in life and refused to talk about it. He was one person in public and one person at home. At work, he was bored. He was struggling to complete work tasks and overall had an anxiety about failing. So we decided to hire a career coach to help resolve the problems. The career coach came in, and after the 3rd session, she stood up to leave the room and let us know that her work here was done and that I needed to read the book called Codependent No More by Melody Beatley. I was mad. We hired her to help him. Why was I needing to read a book? Everyone says it takes 2 to work on a marriage, right? Well, it does take 2 to have a thriving marriage, but it only takes 1 to get the ball rolling. Mother Teresa said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a rock across the waters to create many ripples." More specifically, here are 3 reasons that it literally takes 1 to begin changing a marriage. The first reason is together you and your spouse have built a system where you say one thing and then they respond this way, and then you do this thing, and then they say this, and then you have that tone, and then they storm out of the room. You've built this system that is predictable. You probably could tell me what exactly happens as though it were, memorized, because it is. So the powerful thing about that system is it's both of you. You have your parts, they have their parts. And when you're willing to change your parts or your steps in the system cannot remain the same. It's automatically going to be different because there's no longer the pattern of the system. The second reason it only takes 1 to transform a marriage is that you're both equally contributing to your current results. Now, If you're like me, that is extremely hard to believe because you can see all that they're doing and it's really hard to see what you're doing. My common go-to was I'm the one doing all the work here. This is his stuff that needs to be worked on. But in all my years of counseling couples, coaching couples, I've never found an exception. Both partners are equally contributing to what's not working in the marriage. And the third reason that it takes one to change a marriage is because if you are unhappy, if you're bitter towards your spouse, if you're resentful, if you have unforgiveness, if you're feeling stuck, the responsibility to resolve what's happening inside of you is 100% your responsibility. And as you begin to do the work of changing, deeply changing what's happening in you to the point that you act and respond differently and you feel differently, you think differently, you will transform your marriage. Now, it doesn't mean that your marriage is going to change overnight, but it does mean that you're going to have the power to get off of autopilot and begin to make new choices of new responses and new reactions, which is going to create something new in your marriage. So if you are ready to grow your marriage, let's look at the work that you alone can do in order to do that. Your actions, reactions, attitudes, responses, tones, ways of being, they're not by accident. Based on what you believe about yourself, what you believe about others, and what you believe about life is what's bringing you to do the things that you do. Your work is to look at you and the choices you are making or not making. How are you hurting your spouse or blocking the marriage that you say you long for? So for example, if you feel like your spouse doesn't care about you, how much time have you spent looking at your impact on them? How much do they feel that you care for them? Reality is most things in marriage are like a mirror. And you are getting back what you are offering. Now, if you're anything like me, that might make you really mad to think about because it doesn't feel that way. If that's where you're at, I understand. And let's keep going. I really believed that I was working on me, that I had been working on me. I had been reading books. I had been going to, get support from other women to try and learn how to be a good wife. I really thought I was doing the work. But the powerful thing is I wasn't doing the work that actually was creating change. So I want to give you a glimpse into the work that I began to do. The first thing I began to do was I began to take responsibility for what I was thinking. I started listening to my thoughts. And what I began to discover was I was really critical of myself, very judgmental, very demeaning and belittling to myself. And all of that was the way then I saw my husband, because the relationship I have with myself sets the tone for every other relationship that I have. So as I had all this shame towards myself and I was mean to myself, that was how I treated my husband. So in order to work on that, I began to journal, to get to know myself. I began to spend time in nature. I began to work on seeing myself the way God saw me. And over time, I grew healthier in my relationship with myself, which began to help me relate a lot more healthy to my husband. A second thing that I worked on was I started letting go of controlling my husband's perspective on things. I stopped telling him what he should or shouldn't think, or should or shouldn't feel. And I left him to decide who he wanted to be. Another thing that I changed was I stopped trying to save him. I realized that he needed to have a desire to face his depression. He needed to want to be engaged in work. He needed to want to find joy in life. I couldn't make him do that. And the more I tried, the more he pushed away from me. Another area that I began to work on is I stopped covering for him. When he didn't do what he said he would do, when I worried that he had offended others or he had, disappointed them, I let him take responsibility for them, that instead of covering for him and making excuses for him. And another way that I really began to do the work on me is I began to focus on me. I began to focus on who I wanted to be as a wife, as a mother, as an entrepreneur. I stopped focusing all on him and what he needed and how I could help him. And I turned my focus to me and who I was committed to be, one conversation at a time. And all of these conversations, all of these changes began to produce change one conversation at a time. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a gradual change as I shift my focus away from him and onto me and becoming who I wanted to be. Things in my marriage began to change because things in our conversations were changing. I was no longer telling him what he needed to do, what he needed to work on, why what he was doing wasn't working. I started talking about what I was doing that wasn't working. I started talking about what I was learning about myself and what I was discovering. And all of a sudden, he began to have permission to be a human with things he needed to work on, things he needed to look at, because I was giving him the space to see those things on his own. The more work I did on myself, the more I could easily see my significant contributions to the bitterness and resentment I felt. The more I healed that, the more neutrally I was able to show up in conversations. Our conversations began to change and our interactions began to change. I became more loving, more kind, more empathetic, more willing to be patient with myself. And the more I was able to be that way with my husband, he started wanting to talk to me more. He actually started wanting to learn about what was happening for him. He started seeking out getting support and getting help for himself. Now, it didn't happen overnight. When I let go and let him take responsibility for him, it got worse because for years he hadn't been hitting the pavement or experiencing the consequences of his choices. So it took him hitting some pretty hard places to actually begin to see his own responsibility in taking care of the life that he wanted and developing himself. But over time, the more I let loose and let him do that, and I focused on myself, the more energy and life that was coming to me, the more joy I felt, the more excitement there was in life, which only encouraged and inspired him to want to do the work more. It was a powerful experience that began to happen as I learned to do the real work that could transform the relationship and begin to grow the marriage that I longed for. While it's true that both my husband and I needed to grow as spouses, I was actually the one that was creating the bigger issues. It was me who was the enabler in the relationship. It was me that was blocking the growth because all I was doing was focusing on him and what he needed to grow. And nobody wants to grow when they're being told they have to grow. And as long as I was focused on his growth, I wasn't looking at the growth in myself. It was powerful to discover that I was the enabler. I was the one who was really driving the codependency in the relationship. Because in a codependent relationship, it's the enabler that must change first in order for the enabled to change. As long as I was enabling him, it was making life super easy for him. And until life got uncomfortable, he wasn't going to change. I am 1,000% grateful that I chose to do the work on my marriage, even though my husband wasn't willing to do the work with me, because it worked. And the reason he wasn't willing to do the work with me was a lot of what I was contributing. And I now work with a lot of spouses who want to build thriving lifetime marriages. Sometimes both spouses want to do the work. And a lot of times only one spouse is ready to do the work. And it doesn't matter whether both of you want to do the work or one of you want to do the work. The process I'm going to walk you through is exactly the same. And therefore it works no matter which way it's done. I'm going to walk you through the work of working on you, how to do the work in your backyard so you can have the marriage that you long for. And if you want a marriage worth having, I invite you to do the work to create that. Whether it's you that's doing it by yourself or the two of you doing it together, throw the rock in the lake and begin the ripple effect that will begin to transform your marriage and your children's marriages and your grandchildren's marriages. Create a ripple that will lead you to a legacy worth having. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, I have a free gift for you. You can click this link here, or you can find the link in the description below. If you found this message valuable today, would you please like the video and share in the comments for me one thing that you're taking away from this message. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can continue to get notified whenever new episodes release. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. So, hun.
Yeah.
Will you forgive me for all those years I pointed all 10 fingers at you and all my 10 toes at being the problem in our marriage? Thank you. I had been working on my